We live in a world that never stops asking for more output, more availability, more of us, until there's nothing left to give. Rapid societal shifts, constant digital noise, the daily labor of holding our communities together. It's no wonder so many of us are running on empty. We've been taught our worth is measured by our output or our labor, but you cannot lead, create, or care for others from an empty cup. Today's guest has spent decades helping people refill that cup. Michelle Cassandra Johnson is an acclaimed author, activist, and intuitive healer. In her latest book, You Are Protected: Invoking Spiritual Support to Sustain Your Energy, she offers a timely antidote to collective exhaustion, one rooted in her years of work as a racial equity consultant and shamanic practitioner. In this conversation, we're talking practical, earth centered rituals for restoring body, mind, and spirit. Michelle walks us through how to build a daily practice of what she calls spiritual hygiene and what it means to gather information from sources outside our human self. If you're looking for ways to become more centered and take time for what matters the most, hint, it's yourself, you've landed in the right room. Let's get into the episode. Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman. And today I'm really excited to welcome Michelle Cassandra Johnson to the podcast. She's someone that came across my desk just recently, and I receive a lot of emails from just people interested in the podcast. And I was lucky enough to get Michelle's PR person reaching out to Simona, my editor. And when I read what she was up to, I really resonated with it. Last week, I was doing an episode on moving into our being more than our doing, what we've been indoctrinated into. And I think that Michelle's going to speak to that a little bit and how our cultural norms have led us down a path of listening into more the noise around us than inside of us. But between rapid societal shifts, constant digital connectivity, and the daily weight of keeping our communities afloat, people are facing unprecedented levels of energetic depletion. We've been taught to measure our worth by our labor, yet we cannot build or lead from an empty cup. In her latest book, You Are Protected: Invoking Spiritual Support to Sustain Your Energy, acclaimed author, activist, and intuitive healer Michelle Cassandra Johnson offers a timely antidote to collective exhaustion. Drawing on her decades of experience as a racial equity consultant and shamanic practitioner, Michelle reframes protection not as a hard defensive armor, but as a soft, sustainable practice of self-preservation and ancestral alignment. So, Michelle, I just want to welcome you here today for a really juicy conversation.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I love the blend that you are bringing together. I love sitting down with someone who has studied shamanic wisdom and studied more traditional things, but really is bringing together what seems like the modern day healer. And how do you feel about that? And what has led you to that particular blend of modalities?
Yeah, I love the framing of that, the modern healer, and this as a place to begin. My path, often I say, has been windy, so not linear, which of course is the shamanic path anyway. You know, we travel to other realms. How I think about shamanism is that we travel to other realms with intention and purpose to bring medicine back here, this realm we're in right now. And in some ways, to respond, in many ways, to respond to something you named earlier about the noise and the chaos in the world. And certainly my latest book, You Are Protected, and really all of my books and work are about finding center, finding the part of us that is unwavering, finding steadiness and creating steadiness, also creating consciousness and awareness of what moves us away from our center. My orientation to the world is always we and the collective. And so sometimes I speak about the individual and the work we need to do individually, but it's in service of, yes, the individual and the collective.
Mm.
And so this steadiness and unwaveringness is, yes, for me, I have many practices that I engage to find that center, to feel my feet on the earth, to feel my seat on the earth, to remember I come from nature and who I am. And also it is always in connection to the whole and the larger picture. And as I named, it's always in service of medicine and what is my medicine now. And I think
Mhm.
that is the energy of the healer or a person who holds healing space.
Yeah. And I don't know if everyone is familiar with when you use the word medicine in that way. Like, what is my medicine? You talk a lot about, I think, cultural indoctrination. So we've had this idea that medicine is actually something you get at either the drugstore or prescribed by a doctor. But in this sense, it's different. And so, what's the shamanic view of medicine and what our medicine can be?
Yeah, this shows up in shamanism, which my orientation to shamanism is nature-based practice and various spiritual lineages. I think it also shows up in different spiritual traditions. Like, what is my dharma? What is my purpose? What is my duty? Who are my relations? This is another way to think about it. What am I meant to do here and now? And also, what might I carry with me as far as medicine that came before me, which I think about as ancestral medicine, blood or otherwise, right? So other wisdom streams or lineages. And I'm glad you mentioned, and actually invited me to share some about what does medicine mean. And so I'll just name that I think of myself and others as alchemists. And we understand alchemy as we change something from one form into another. And so much needs to shift and change right now culturally and in the collective. And so much healing is needed. And so I think an essential question that I hold is what, as Leonard Cohen would say, imperfect offering might I make, right? What do I have to contribute to this time, this place that, yes, might benefit now, but also into the future and heal the past? So that's how I think of medicine.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So what I'm hearing you say too is like your medicine is going to look one way and mine is going to look a different way, but they are contributions to society. I feel like a lot of the ways that we were learned, it was, every man for himself, every woman for herself. And there was separation because you're saying like, this is about the collective. This is about unity conscious. This is about rising together. And so how can my medicine, like why is it important to take our medicine
Mm-hmm.
sort of like, I don't want to say seriously, but like really honorably, like no, we are
Mm-hmm.
actually needing your medicine right now. How do you feel about everyone kind of contributing in that way?
Yeah, I think this is really important because you mentioned indoctrination and culture. And, I've been in a lot of activist spaces and organizing spaces because I am an activist and have been for quite a long time. The way that shows up is different, which actually speaks to your question about
Yeah.
medicine. But some of the framing in those activist spaces is we all show up in this way, that you must go to the protest to be a good activist, right? Or human, really, at this point in time. Or you must every day write 8 letters to the legislature about what is happening, right? And I think that really doesn't honor the breadth of archetypal energies we can draw from right now for healing on the planet, which directly translates into our medicine and how we implement our medicine and how
Mhm.
we share it. We don't all labor in the same way, nor are we intended to labor in the same way, and conditions shift, right? Things change within our bodies, we age, things change around us that might change how we show up in a particular moment. And so I feel like there needs to be some pliability, some flexibility, adaptability that
Okay.
we call on at this time, and acceptance of the different medicine that people might bring.
Thank you for bringing up this kind of the activism. I've taken part in certain things and I find sometimes my energy is a mismatch. And then I'll hear other people saying like, "Oh, that's not for me." Like even if we take something like a protest, right? And so what's the call there for us as individuals to kind of like, because what I'm sensing is that we're calibrating to like whether it's the archetype or the energy of how we're supposed to do our work in a sense, like the way that's been
Mm-hmm.
put out before us may not be your way. And how do we kind of tune into that without, maybe even carrying a guilt around it or an I should around it? Because yeah, I think it's just great that you brought up that example and kind of I think a lot of people wonder about that. Like, should I be doing certain things?
Yeah, I think, part of what you name is about conditioning and, frankly, sometimes performativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think technology and social media have a lot to do with this because of what's presented to us. And then I'm a good person if I fill
Yeah.
in the blank. I think that we're all responding to that. And I'll offer an example of of how we show up. I was an elected official for 6 years.
Okay.
And a yoga teacher at the time. I still am a spiritual practitioner, right? I meditated every morning. We had our council meetings every week. I was very active in the community. And our council, I'm in North Carolina, and there were these Mondays called Moral Mondays at the legislature in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so there were huge protests that people would go to. So our council decided we're going to have a quorum of our council, the town council, go and risk arrest at this protest because people are getting arrested every week for protesting. So we went, we were arrested, and I said I was only going to get arrested once for this because there are consequences. I'm in a Black body. They're just consequences for risking arrest given culture and dominance and how things operate and hierarchies. And after that, I couldn't go back in the legislative building. So if you were arrested, you couldn't go back in, but we still wanted to participate. And so what I did is I set up these meditations every Monday at the Capitol on the lawn for anybody who wanted to come and sit. We sat in silence. We had signs. People would, we were right in the middle of the protest. And I just offer that as like a lived experience of I showed up in one way one Monday, and then I showed up a different way for the subsequent Mondays that I participated in this protest, and people joined me. So there was a different access point. Not everyone could get arrested. Not everyone can get to the protest, right? Mm-hmm. Not everyone can do the same thing. And yet I found a different way to still be in protest of what was happening. And I was able to bring spirit into that, which felt really important to me. So I just wanted to make it real for people listening. That's a different way. Or sitting. Sometimes I just meditate in the space I'm in right now. I mean, I meditate a lot, but with the intention of sending energy to all those who might need it and benefit from it in service of the collective good. That to me is using my medicine. That is me making some offering. If I don't actually want to engage in other ways, I'm still calling attention to, I'm conjuring my energy, I'm drawing into my center, and I'm visualizing where my energy will go and where it's most needed. So that's another example for people. I mean, there are so many. We could go on and on. I just think we have to be tending our own inner sanctuary and get really clear about what is possible for us. And also to know that sometimes what's possible for us is only revealed in the moment when it is needed. And so we shapeshift. This is very shamanic at that time because of what's being called for and called forth.
Okay. Beautiful. Yeah. I love that. Those examples. And, I've heard as well, and I use this as sort of a guidepost is instead of going against to go with. So I'm not against certain things, but this is what I want to experience in life. This is what I stand for. This is what my value systems are. And and other people might, I know they go the against route, but I know for myself, it's the promotion of what I'm wanting to create in the world that I try to remember that stream. And sometimes it feels like, I don't think it's in my nature. I think that's why I keep on bringing up, because I noticed that you were into talking about our conditioning. And it wasn't until, I would say, even for myself, when I went through one of my coaching programs about 6 years ago now, the teacher would talk about our conditioning all the time. And that's when I first started to understand the layers and layers and layers that had shaped me, that are no, Maureen, it's real. It's real. But I think it's important conversation, because if I'm, discovering it 6 years ago, there's we're all discovering it at our own rate, but possibly now. So it's the first time someone's really taking a look.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what helps us identify what our contribution is the awareness that we are indoctrinated and shaped and conditioned by dominant cultural norms. And yet how those norms land or are internalized is different based on the different identities we embody, based on narrative and story, based on familial influence, given or chosen family, and the shifting conditions that happen and what makes us wake up, right? And raise consciousness. So there's a lot that goes into that. And sometimes people want to sort of neutralize experience as if we all move through the world in the same way, or we shouldn't be talking about conditioning as we're talking about mysticism and magic, right? And shamanism. And even shamanism, to me, which is a whole other probably long conversation, doesn't neutralize our lived experience in these incarnations.
Hmm.
right? I come back to earth. I go
Hmm.
on my shamanic journey and I come back in this body I'm in. And then I have
Right.
to reckon with what is happening in this body and what happens to it because I'm living during this time and
Hmm.
at this place.
And that's very, very evident in these times. And I think for in my world, at least I can say, but I think in the cultural right now, there's such an expansion of spirituality, of the mysticism, of all of this
Mm-hmm.
happening. And it is the all of it, because if one thing's evident to me is that I'm very human and I'm in this human body and I'm experiencing a lot of things in this realm. And
Right.
so, that I'll say that. And I noticed too, okay, I want to jump into with you and the work that you do is kind of how you speak of taking a look at ourselves and how we spend our time. And this is part of the introspection. This is the part of going within. This is part of like finding our medicine. This is finding our contribution. But you talk about, okay, let's take a look at how we spend our time. And I think that you might think of it as auditing, like, okay, what is going on in my life and why would that be beneficial to look at? And what might I find, or what might I be able to implement when I do find certain things?
Yeah, some of this is about the reality that the internal experience is wholly connected to the our external world. And
Hmm.
so we need to do the work of, yes, looking at what are the factors external to me that have influenced me and shaped me,
Yeah.
but also then what have I internalized and or what patterns might I want to look at to better understand, to change because we're in this constant evolution, I believe. And part of what you just shared is related to the introduction and you are protected, my upcoming book, and this empty cup, which you read about, that we can't pour from an empty cup. Because while I feel like it's important for us to think about our medicine and contribution, we cannot deplete ourselves doing that. We have to actually replenish to continue to offer our medicine. And that's the
Hmm.
spirit in which this work of protection and spiritual practice comes from. There is, in fact, it's not called an audit, but in the book of like where are we spending our energy? Where do I place my energy? Is that where I want to put my attention and
Hmm.
my energy? And where do I have choice? Because there are some places where, and I've written about this, where I don't really have choice. Like
Yeah.
my mother has Alzheimer's, I'm her primary
Hmm.
caretaker. I mean, I could choose not to do that, but there would be grave consequences. Like that would be the reality. And so there, even looking at those places and my feelings about that and understanding, well, I don't necessarily have a choice. I have a choice in how I show up for her. But there are other places where I have a choice, where I can say no, where I can say yes,
Yeah.
where I can say I need to pause and actually come back to that steadiness and unwavering part of myself and draw into center enough so that then I can go back into the world and continue to contribute in these outward facing ways.
Yeah. And that brings up such a good point, because what you're describing with the experience with your mother is that is a big emotional output, physical
Yes.
output to care for not only an aging relative, but I think especially with Alzheimer's, dementia, like it's really, really hard. And that question comes because I think a lot of people right now they have like these very extreme
Hmm.
circumstances in their life, and including myself. And that question comes of, well, do I need to drop everything in order to service what needs to be supported in my life? Or is there room for me? And if there's room for me, what kind of practices can I be doing to kind of expand that space for myself?
Yeah, I appreciate the way you framed that because oftentimes folks like to think in binaries, right? Do I drop everything or
Yeah.
do I try to do everything, which we know doesn't work. Neither work really. And they might provide some relief temporarily, the like dropping everything, but that's not reality. Most of us actually can't
Yeah.
do that, right?
Hmm.
We're needed. There are things that call our attention. We have responsibilities to
Yeah.
folks in our lives, right? And so I think, figuring out based on what is possible at the time, knowing that we're in this process of evolution, asking these questions about like what is possible, after we look at where is my energy going and what and who am I responsible to and for, and then where do I have more room, right, to say yes, to say no, to say maybe. I feel like that's an important practice, and our conditioning has some to do with that as well, because based on the identities we embody, some of us have been socialized to be in the caretaker role all of the time at the expense of ourselves. And I think we can't actually continue to offer our medicine and what is most needed at this time to actually heal if, as I've named, we've depleted our energy
No.
because we're constantly in that caretaking.
Yeah.
And so there's just this adjustment. I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm thinking about physical adjustments right now, and like the micro adjustments one might make in a posture that changes the entire posture. I feel like that application and this,
Yeah.
the way we're talking about this, like what's the micro adjustment or choice point that we have
Yeah.
that might actually make a big impact?
Right. And in a linear sense, it doesn't seem like it's going to add up to much, but in a quantum or more expansive sense, it's
Right.
like, no, that can make all the difference or a huge difference in your life. Yeah, I think that those kind of ways in which we developed the people pleaser or the overdoer or the over caretaker, yeah, like they were born of, I think a lot of times how we grew up, most of the time probably, but then they become this identity and this projection that the other person, the other people in our lives need us to be that. And it's like, wow, like how do you think of those identities we took on and how they're actually invitations to be like, is that really you anymore? Is what's really emerging from within you that might be calling for, you use the word more evolved, but I was thinking like an evolved version of, and then how do you kind of work with people on that? Because I think as I often say as women, a lot of women carry that, but I think men do too. The people pleaser and these identities that just don't fit anymore.
I mean, I think people of all different genders and gender expressions, of course, can internalize these messages about caretaking or people pleasing is one of the identities that you named. And I think what you shared about, we may have, and this is parts work, right? If people are familiar with internal family systems work, there are these different parts that we embody. Often they are connected to archetypal energies. And many of them took root when we were children and influenced by the beings around us and the messages that we took in from culture and our experiences with institutions. And the question that you've surfaced is, where are those places where we might ask ourselves, does this fit anymore? Do I need to activate this part in this way? Or when does this part become activated? And what do I notice about it? And is it a part that I want to actually engage at this time? And so but there's this automatic way, and actually yoga philosophy talks about this as samskaras, which is those are tendencies or patterns. They're actually in yoga, they're based on these, connected to the root cause of our suffering. They also show up in Buddhism as well. So there are these tendencies, and when they become rote, like we're not conscious of them anymore, right? Then we just become the people pleaser, or we become the caretaker as if it's the whole of who we are, which is not true. And as if we're fixed in time, which is also false,
Love
right?
that.
We're not
Yeah.
fixed in time. So it doesn't allow us to really, I think deepening consciousness about what we've internalized and our roles and those micro choice points, you mentioned expansion earlier, allows us to expand versus contract. Yeah.
I mean, even the conversation alone, when you talk about working with the body and being a yoga practitioner, it's like the conversation alone, has me expanding and has me, some people out there, a lot of listeners, of course, maybe people are just listeners. Maybe they get individual support or maybe they join in groups. But if they're at those precipices of like, what's next for me? Like, am I being called to work one-on-one or am I called to work in group? Like, can you talk about sort of like, this seems like 101, but the question is just coming to me, like, what is that benefit for an individual to work like within the one-on-one relationship, but what also can be the benefits of working within a collective group?
Well, I think that this feels like an important topic because I think it has to do with something that I experience a lot with one-to-one and in groups, which is whatever might be in the way of folks really listening to the call and what they want to practice and what they wish to embody and what kind of work / practice they want to participate in. And underneath that is what is their purpose. And so there can be some confusion about purpose, particularly when we are caretaking and have responsibilities and bills need to be paid and right. And often I found there's even with all of that, each person that I've met at least has this, it may be covered up, but there's a yearning for something, right? And they're either aligned with that or things are in the way of their ability to be aligned with that. That's real too, right? There are pressures that may get in the way, or there may be noise, right? Narratives that get in the way of that, or both, right? So much can get in the way of that. So I just want to name that because I find that the people that I'm in community with and conversation with, many of them know what it is they want to do. But they're scared to do it, right? They don't trust that it can work out. They don't trust that they will pivot if they need to pivot. We can shift if we need to shift. And so I feel like that's a big piece of whether people are working one-to-one or in groups, that's what I experience a lot with folks. Like the lack of trust in themselves and the lack of trust in the universe and what it can provide, but also that we're in deep relationship with the universe too. And yes, things can get in the way, but we're like co-conspiring with. Right. Or that's how I feel about it. And that's definitely been my experience in my life for sure. That's been, there's been doubt. Are things going to work out? Will there be abundance be there? Right. Enough for me to do what it is. And I have evidence that it has worked out in that way. And I know that's not true for everyone across the globe. That's been my lived experience. And what I'll say to your direct question is that I do both one-to-one work and group work, as you named, and I love both. And they're very different in some ways because in a group, you have a system that's there, that's evident to you, right? It's like multiple people and characters and players. And I think about family systems. I was a therapist for a long time. And so I think about the family system, like when 2 or 3 people are together or 8 people are together or 20 people are together, all the different roles show up in that space, regardless of topic and content and structure. And then people express that. And as a facilitator, it's our responsibility to hold that space and the integrity of it, which I love because it's dynamic. And I love those moments when things come up because I trust myself to respond to them and to invite the group to respond. But someone has to want to do that work to be in a group. Like you have to do that kind of lift and hold the group, which is a little different than one-to-one. I'd say one-to-one, that work can feel, it's just a different, to sort of manage that space is a bit different than a group. But the changes that can happen in either space are profound. And particularly I find in group spaces, because the group is, I'm holding it, but it's also holding itself. And one person can propel a group forward. It is this unity consciousness. You mentioned that earlier. So we can go that way, or we can go to dysfunction together. Right. And I feel like that is what the collective is actually in the middle of. Where are we going? Are we going to get it together and move together? Or is it all going to fall apart? And there is much falling apart. I mean, and some things that definitely need to fall apart. And I think that's the essential question for us as a collective.
Yes. And I don't know if it was when we were recording, I think it was, but you had mentioned magic and miracles. And I know that within shamanism, or just what you've cultivated, is that noticing, I'm going to say. I think the more, what we sometimes think is subtle, but they're not that subtle, whisperings to us in our environment. Like, can you speak to this? Because I think it's really important. And in many ways, are we becoming more expanded in what we are perceiving and sensing and picking up on? I think whether it is like a hummingbird flying by or a butterfly or who comes across or what's on the license plate. But can you talk about these things that we think of subtle, but they're actually possibly very strong? I don't know if that's the word, messages for us.
Yeah, I talk about polarities a lot in my practice and also within shamanism specifically, because some of the practices are about working with forces or energies that we perceive to be in opposition that are actually deeply intertwined with one another, like light and dark, right? Or night and day. And often in a shamanic journey, we're going into darkness in some way to figure out what we might see and gather from that place to come back into this space. That's not always the framing, but that's how I think about it a lot of the time. And so I think, the energy on our planet right now, of course, as I mentioned, there's so much, and you mentioned chaos and noise, and there's a lot of human-made chaos and noise that, of course, is affecting the more than human world and nature as well. But I say it that way because the more than human world, inherently, it's not chaotic in the same way as humans are chaotic, which feels important for us to understand, particularly because the more than human world is such an ally for me and support and place I do turn to and place I receive noticings from and messages from. But there's this chaos going on. And at the same time, I think there is heightened consciousness and spiritual awakening and breaking open happening. And that's why I mentioned polarities. They're both are happening. We may not always feel that or see that or be able to witness both, but I think they're present. So that's kind of the background I want to offer. And then within that, because of there are a lot of often called light workers, right? Or folks working within these different realms for the collective good and the highest good. I think as light workers do this kind of work, we're actually amplifying this experience of noticing messages for not just for ourselves, but for other people. Like we're changing the field basically through energy. That's how it works because we are energy. And something I know from my own experience is that, I receive messages all the time, and an intuitive healer teacher of mine, Aimee Cartier, she taught me about the signature of spirit. That's what she calls it. So we see the license plate and we know the message is for us.
Yeah.
Or we see the butterfly, I'm a beekeeper, or we hear the honeybee fly past, right? And it sounds as if it actually is saying something to us, right? I've had this with my hives where I've just sat there and I feel like they're transmitting information to me, which they are light workers. So it makes sense that I would experience that. Or butterflies or hummingbirds. You named those as well. Hummingbirds who feel like spirits in themselves that just come visit us here. That's how I experience hummingbirds. And so I feel like the noticing is all around us. And yet what gets in the way of that is people trusting their intuition and listening to the signature of spirit that actually pervades more than dysfunction. People don't trust it because it may not feel scientific. It may not feel linear, right? It may not be explainable. And so often what I find is that people block that, even though they so desperately want it to mean something, right? But they block that. And a lot of my work is like, how can we connect more deeply to intuition so you can notice the signature of spirit in your own life and how messages come to you. So many come to me from the more than human world. Many come to me from my grandmother, Dorothy, who is an ancestor no longer earthside, who communicates in my dreams, she's in direct communication with me all of the time and I can feel her. And so it's learning to listen to how do we receive messages. This feels like the 5 clairs, right? Do we hear, do we sense, do we see, do we smell, do we taste, right? Do we know? There's an internal knowing and wisdom that we draw from. And often one of those is stronger than another for folks, even though we all have a connection to the way clairvoyance expresses itself and shows up for us. But typically that's how signature of spirit moves through. And for me, I might hear something in my dreams, I see something, or I just know, like it's a go this direction and I'll listen to it. And so it's trusting that. So that's a long answer, but I feel like because I mentioned the field is changing, that is part of what is available to everyone if we can trust that. And that is why I said we're co-conspiring with the universe, because when I don't listen to those messages, often there's a block. I don't receive what I need. I'm not able to show up fully in the way I wish for humanity and the more than human world and healing. And so I want to invite people into this is yogic for sure, because yoga talks about perception. My eyes can only see certain things, right? And so much happens in this experience of trusting, and this is shamanism and spiritual practice, is trusting that what my eyes might see, there may be a lot more than what I actually can see, right? And so inviting people into that, which that's a whole other, that means we have to trust mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
part of the indoctrination is about not trusting mystery
Yeah.
and the void and darkness and what we can't see.
Yeah, I love it. Perfect answer. And I think it's beautiful because that passion comes through and just that loving universe. And I was going to ask you, even if we're living, because you speak to nature. So I live right outside of Chicago and I've got tree lined streets. We've got some parks, but is it okay that if we're not surrounded by the lakes and the forests and the streams and things like that, how can we still be one with nature and kind of giving ourselves the experience, and why would we even do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this, because in most of my work, I actually talk about elemental energy.
Mm-hmm.
And in You Are Protected, there's an entire chapter about elemental energy and how we bring it forth to call in specifically protection, spiritual, physical, psychic, mental protection, emotional protection. And I'm sure folks who listen to your podcast are familiar with air and fire and water and earth, the above and the below, and then the cardinal directions that correspond with the elements that I just named, and that energy of polarities of above and below. And one way that we experience elemental energy is within our own bodies. So we experience air through breath. We experience fire, often in what is called the Manipura chakra in yoga. It's above the belly button and below the sternum, that place that's connected to self-esteem and the solar plexus and fire and sun. We experience air also connected to throat too, and voice. We are mostly made of water,
Yeah.
right? We are
Mm-hmm.
in bodies, and this flesh is earth. So you don't have to be surrounded by the more than human world in physical form, because it's actually housed within your body.
Yeah.
And people can draw on this by taking a deep breath, or by taking a sip of water, or blessing the water and taking a sip of water, right? Or feeling that internal fire and yearning, or feeling what in yoga is called grunty. It's like the goo, the stuff that gets in the way before we actually can say the thing or sing or chant, right? And express our voice fully. Right? Or earthing, right? Feeling our feet on the earth, even if I'm inside a room and not outside, or leaning up against a tree, or standing at the water. You can call this in, but the other way that I work with earth, particularly if people do not have direct access, is, do they have images of trees or water? Have they been to a place, or do they visualize a place they'd like to go to that is water, a mountain range, right? A sunset that's beautiful, that has all of the colors. This is another way we can work with the elements. So yes, in physical form, but also energetically.
I love that. Yeah. Whenever I'm in a meditation and it invites me to go to one of your favorite places you've ever been, I always am taken to the ocean. And we went to Cayman Island one year, or Cayman Islands, and there was the beautiful ocean. And somehow someone had constructed a circle of rocks within the ocean that was not very deep. So you could go out and step on it, but just even sitting on the beach alone. And that is the scape that always comes to me. And it brings in peace, and it brings in harmony and calm to my system. So it's exactly what you're saying. Like, I don't have to fly there to experience that. Yeah.
It's right there.
Which is a gift. Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're working on quieting the noise, even in our own life, in order to hear our own calling and be with ourselves, do you have any kind of almost like takeaways around that? I mean, personally, when I walk my dog, leave my phone at home.
Mm-hmm.
When I eat my food, focus just on blessing the food or the water and being with that experience alone. But are there invitations there that you have for any of the listeners to just kind of quiet a bit in order to hear their signal, to hear their own inner voice?
Yes. And what you named, the practices you named, I feel like are really important. Where can we separate ourselves? How can we from technology, even for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, for
Yeah.
longer, if possible? And what does that feel like? And often there's resistance and anxiety that comes with that as we begin to practice it. And also you're naming mindfulness, which is a practice we can bring into everything. So you mentioned around like food and like focusing on that, or a meal and appreciation for that, or a blessing, right? Honoring what we are about to enter into, which feels essential. And the world is loud. It is noisy. I had a concussion in 2014, and many people know that one of the results of a concussion can be that everything feels loud. There's too much stimulation. And so everything changed after that because there was light stimulation, noise stimulation, just too many people around me stimulation, right? I was very hypersensitive, I would say, to the noise. And I think about the time we live through now, and it feels like that. Like everything is amped up, right? It's on a 10 or beyond, and it can be hard, as you said, difficult to hear ourselves within that and to remember like
Yeah.
who we are and what is
Right.
here and why we're here and that we are here. We can become the noise, right? Or we can recognize it as what it is and then make those choices that we talked about in response to a reality that's very noisy right now. And so, some of the things that I do are similar to what you do. When I take my dog on a walk, I don't have my phone with me. And so I'm just really often in the morning in particular, I'm just watching the world wake up. And I am outside a fair amount, just in my yard a lot, going to sit with my bees and listen to them or look at the sacred trees that are here and connect with them or make offerings to them, which I don't need my phone to do, right? I
Right.
just need my body, myself, whatever it is I'm going to offer, a note of gratitude. And I also think something that is helpful is I engage in some sort of meditation multiple times a day, actually in different ways. And meditation can feel difficult for folks, but really what I mean when I say it is a moment where we turn inward enough to take a deep breath, to notice, right? My body breathes. It's inhaling and it's exhaling. I'm right here right now. And then a step for like what is here,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And then maybe it's just silence. I just sit in that and dwell in that for a few minutes. But I know when I don't do that, the world feels noisier, it's louder. But when I
Right.
am able to quiet things enough, right, either through sitting or moving meditation, walking, listening to the sound of my breath, listening to the wind, whatever it might be, just taking those moments to come back to myself.
Yeah.
That feels essential in mitigating some of that noise.
Mm. Well, for me, I'll say to be in your presence and receive your medicine is just like, I'm relaxed over here. I am, right? And I think even slowing down the conversation, but
Yeah.
something's happening too where I think we're being called to this slowness, even if it's been a part of shamanism, even if it's been a part of certain, Buddhism, all the things. For
Mm-hmm.
a long time, there's something happening right now where we're being asked to reevaluate, recalibrate, whatever it is. And it's a beautiful invitation. I find it seems ironic in a way because I think that when we came out of the pandemic, it seemed like, oh, that was the time that we were doing it. But now we have a few years under our belt since then, and it's almost like another let's really begin again and create what we're desiring to create. So I can't thank you enough for being here today. Your book sounds beautiful. And
Thank you.
what else do you want to share around where people can find you or any resources to direct them to?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to
Yeah.
be here with you. It's been lovely to be in conversation with you. And I love this ending on slowness because urgency, even though we live through urgent times, often urgency and reactivity don't always promote the healing that we might want, or the creation of the world in which we want to live, and sustainability of connected to the world in which we want to live and the things that we value. But the nervous system often, it wants to speed up.
Mhm.
And yet I don't think that's the medicine for now. So just doubling down on what you said about that. So I mentioned You Are Protected. It comes out in September, so September 15th, and there'll be various events related to that, but it's all about spiritual protection for folks who work with folks one-to-one or within groups. And it has so many different practices in it. I mentioned the elemental energy, but it has a chapter about ancestral support. We can call in archetypal energy, saints and deities that we can call on, why we actually need protection, natural curios. And it has a chapter of spells that is the culmination really of the book, and an invitation to create a spiritual hygiene plan from that audit of like where our energy is going and the choice points, the micro choice points we have. I also offer so many other online, virtual, and in-person offerings that range in length. So I travel a lot to teach, and the best way to learn about those immersions, which might happen in your community, or opportunities to practice and study with me, either self-guided or live virtually, they're all on my website, which is michellecjohnson.com. And then I send out a weekly newsletter, which I've heard is like having a cup of tea with me. I treat my writing as a spiritual practice, and it comes out every Thursday morning. And often it includes my events, but also practices, meditations, where I have this humming practice that I offer for attunement, or different mantras that I work with, or journaling prompts. I'm really big on journaling prompts. So if people want to know more about me and feel like they're in the room with me with their tea, the newsletter is definitely the way.
I'll be signing up.
To connect with me, and just, it ranges in topic, but it's all about the healing. Sometimes I share more intimate details about my mom, who I mentioned, and just that journey. And sometimes it's about, which this isn't disconnected, the world, right? And sometimes it is specifically about these practices and why we need to practice. So, and nature is a big part of it too. And then I'm on Instagram at Skill in Action is my handle on Instagram. So those are the three ways: newsletter, website, and Instagram, where
Beautiful.
you can find me pretty
That's
consistently.
great. Yeah. Well, I'll definitely sign up for the newsletter because I love that. And I feel like when you find an email newsletter that really tells the story a certain way or just speaks to you, it's like those are the ones like I keep in my inbox. And there's not a whole lot, right?
Yeah.
But so I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for being here. I always say thanks to the listeners for just leaning into the conversation as well, but it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or MysticalSisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.